With us now, NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, also with us, NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, and Veronica Cardenas, former Assistant Chief Counsel for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So, Julia, what exactly happened on Saturday between this proclamation and the court order? What can we expect in today's hearing?
Well, it was a wild Saturday night, Jose, because it really came down to the wire when Judge Boasberg, in an emergency hearing, said that any planes that were in the air or if they had not yet released the migrants who were on board needed to bring those people back to the United States. The lawyer for the Justice Department said that he fully understood and would direct federal agencies to act within accordance of that order. But instead, we learned on Sunday that those people actually had been released into the hands of El Salvadoran authorities and taken to that supermax prison that the president has developed there. And so basically, there is no longer a way for the court to enforce this order. They're out of the jurisdiction of the United States. The question is, and the White House is disagreeing with the plaintiff's attorneys on this, is whether or not the judge had the authority to issue that order before those immigrants were handed over to El Salvador. I've spoken to a lot of people who have said that as long as they are on a plane in an international airspace and before they're handed over to the authorities of another country, of course, they were on that plane with American pilots and within the custody of ICE, which is part of the U.S. law enforcement, that they should have been able to be turned around in compliance with that order. But instead, they were released, and now it's really difficult to see how they could be returned. If there's one question we want the answer to, Jose, it's how will a court now respond to what it looks like is a defiance of that order, at least in the way that Boasberg stated it on Saturday night. We also were expecting a similar hearing that we now understand is postponed in the case of a doctor from Brown who was deported. That's been postponed. But at 4 p.m. today, we'll be able to hear how the administration will answer to these questions and what Judge Boasberg will do, because he has very little power over those 300 people. But is there something he can do to the administration to try to really, cull the power and show the authority of the judicial system over the executive branch when it comes to issues like this?
So, Garrett, what more is the White House saying about all of this?
Yeah, Jose, I think the White House feels pretty clearly that this judge does not have the power to enforce his order in this case now or in the future. The White House press secretary put out a statement that at first kind of disputed the timeline elements of this that Julia just laid out, the idea that this plane was already in the air and that it was over international waters. Not that they were defying the court order, the White House argues, but that it was essentially no longer operable from where this plane was geographically at that point. They also argue that they think that this is an overreach by this judge, something that they'll ultimately have to prove in court. The president was also asked about this on Air Force One returning to Washington last night, where he was asked to defend another interesting wrinkle in all of this, legally speaking, which is this is a wartime act that gives presidents wartime powers. The U.S. is not at a declared state of war right now, but the president is arguing that his own rhetoric about an immigration invasion makes this action legal. Listen to his defense.
Well, this is a time of war because Biden allowed millions of people, many of them criminals, many of them at the highest level. They invaded our country. So this isn't, in that sense, this is war. In many respects, it's more dangerous than war because, in war they have uniforms. You know who you're shooting at. You know who you're going after. These are people that came out, they're walking our streets.
It'll be up to the court system to decide if that argument has any legal muster to it. But I'm glad you showed that polling graphic because the White House also believes that politics are on their side in this moment and that the American people want them to take these dramatic actions regardless of what the court system says.
And Veronica, here's some of what Borders Czar Tom Homan had to say this morning about how things occurred over the weekend. Take a listen.
We're already in international waters. We're outside the borders of the United States. I'm the Borders Czar. Once you're outside the border, it is what it is. But they're in international waters, already on the way south, close to landing. You know what? We did what we had to do. Remove terrorists, significant public safety threats from the United States by the order, the proclamation by the President of the United States. We did the right thing.
Veronica, do you see anything here that was done illegally?
I think that what this administration is doing is really bypassing due process rights. They are in a rush to deport people, and that just loses a lot of due process. So there are factors here. if it's true, right? If these are really dangerous criminals, have affiliations with Nicaraguas, maybe they do deserve to be deported, but they do deserve their due process rights. Many of them were in asylum proceedings while they were detained. So if they did pose a threat, immigration law already has ways to lessen that threat by detaining them. And so what we're seeing here is a administration that thinks that they are above the law, right? And so the Alien Enemies Act is a wartime provision. And one of the most interesting things about that is the checks and balances. Congress has the authority to declare war. The 3 times that it was used was when there was a declaration of war. And now the president is taking it upon himself to declare what an invasion constitutes and to also alter what a foreign national or government constitutes as. So I think that there were many steps here that didn't follow the proper protocols or lawful.
Yeah, and I want to, Veronica, go into a little bit more into depth of what the president has been saying. And here's part of a proclamation, that proclamation. On Saturday, I proclaim that all Venezuelan citizens 14 years of age or older who are members of Tren de Aragua are within the United States and are not actually naturalized or lawful permanent residents of the United States are liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. So, Veronica, how does the government identify who is a member of Tren de Aragua, another gang, or not?
And that is a very nuanced issue, one that is essentially he said, she said things. So when we go and I experienced this under the Obama administration when there was an attack on MS-13 gang members. And when you see the reports that ICE officers, ERO, have issued in those cases, it was looking at the tattoos that people have and admissions. Both of those can pose serious consequences and also nuances in the law, because when an ERO officer is interviewing a non-citizen, we don't really know what happens in that interaction. So when they get to court, they can say, I never said that, or I renounce my membership. And also the identification of tattoos can be problematic. Yes, there is a database that says what type of tattoos are specific to certain criminal organizations, but then there are others that are kind of in a gray area there.
Yeah, the Tren de Aragua are really the worst of the worst. And then they have relationships with other gangs in Venezuela that happen to be tied directly to the Maduro regime. I mean, it's important that we underline who these Tren de Aragua people are. But the question that you just, brought up is, how do you confirm that someone is Tren de Aragua or any of the other gangs that are directly tied to the Venezuelan government? But Julia, on another part of our conversation, you mentioned earlier that this comes as a doctor and a professor at Brown University was deported after she returned from a trip to Lebanon, despite having a valid U.S. visa, according to court filings. What more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, Jose, we're actually getting some more on that case just while I've been on air with you. There was a filing that the hearing that was supposed to happen just this morning on that case where Customs and Border Protection were going to have to answer as to why they deported that professor, despite the fact that the judge had ordered that she not be deported and that he have 48 hours notice before deportation. We understand that's now been put on hold, that there may have been some confusion, that CBP wasn't told of the judge's order. And it appears that for some reason the doctor's lawyers are withdrawing from the case. It's not clear if perhaps maybe just one is withdrawing and another one is sticking on it. But there's a lot of confusion right there. So that case has been put on hold. That was a case we also expected to see the answer to the question of, what will the Trump administration say if they're in defiance of a court order? While that's on hold, we're expecting to get more from that 4 p.m. hearing about what we've been talking about in regards to El Salvador.